systems don't transform overnight, and that requires us to be patient. It requires us to have strong partnerships, because as single entities, we can't create wide-scale impact. As single entities, we can't transform a whole system. We can transform a part of it, but if a system is 100 parts and you transform one and the other 99 don't change, it's going to take you 10 times the time to change anything. So I think, we need to remain close to each other, going back to that networking, but, conversation, but close to people that are like us and people that are not like us. Because the moment we disconnect from people's lived realities, our intentions lose relevance, and that idea of transforming a system loses its essence completely.
Welcome to System Catalyst, the show that cracks the code for making the world a better place. I'm your host, English Saul. My guest today is Vimbai Masiyiwa, a Zimbabwean entrepreneur and the CEO and co-founder of Batoka Africa. Batoka Africa is a regenerative hospitality group that's redefining what African luxury looks like through community-first tourism. Vimbai is a global voice for young leaders, serving on advisory boards for One Young World and Bryant University. She was also named to the Forbes Africa 30 Under 30 list in 2024. Vimbai is the daughter of Zimbabwean philanthropists Strive and Vimbai Masiyiwa, whom you might remember from a previous episode. Through everything she does, Vimbai stays grounded in her mission to help women and shape a future where African excellence sets the standard. Vimbai, welcome to System Catalyst.
Well, thank you so much, English, for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Me too. It was really serendipitous that we got to see each other earlier in the year. I was really glad about that and could sort of set the seeds for this eventual conversation. And I've been following you and kind of what you've been doing on social media and what you've been doing with Batoka Africa. And I know that you've grown up in a family that has been deeply involved in social impact and entrepreneurship. And I was wondering if you could just start off by sort of telling us, what was that experience like for you? How did that shape your vision and your mentality today about entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think, as an entrepreneur now, I reflect back on how I grew up, and I really see that as a blessing. I think growing up in my family meant being surrounded by conversations about purpose, about responsibility, and about the possibilities that were out there. I witnessed from a really young age how my parents approached business. And that business was a vehicle for wealth creation, but rather a tool for us to solve problems and uplift people and shift systems, particularly on the African continent. And I think that's really shaped my worldview. It's definitely shaped how I approach my business as an entrepreneur. I saw how large-scale impact is built, not really through one-off initiatives or, surface-level partnerships, but through consistency with integrity, and also the courage that it took to make long-term decisions, knowing that they were, most likely going to be unpopular. But it was also a really grounding childhood. I think beyond the public-facing work that my parents have always done, particularly in business, I saw the sacrifice that was behind that, the long hours, the difficult moments, the difficult decisions that had to be made. And for me, impact wasn't something that was abstract, but something that I witnessed in real time. So while it was inspiring, it also prepared me for the realities of leadership. And I learned that doing meaningful work really requires discipline, it requires patience, and most importantly, humility.
Well, and I think I've had the privilege now of knowing you for a while, and I feel like that has come through in so many of our interactions and just you as a person. And so how have you been able to take so much of that, especially, you speak about consistency and integrity and how that is folded into Batoka Africa. So tell us about Batoka Africa and what it is and sort of how it came to be.
Yeah, so Batoka Africa, to put it simply, you could say it started with when I looked at the safari lodge industry in particular, and hospitality on the African continent. I think now that I've spent a couple of years in it, it was really a question around how do we build African hospitality to be more beneficial to Africans, and not Africans like myself that are sitting in business or in corporate offices and in the major cities on the continent, but every African, the local communities in which our properties are built in which our operations exist. How do we make this something that is beneficial for all of us, that creates value for all of us and creates dignity and creates growth opportunity? And then the other side of it was, going through school, have the privilege of having been educated both in South Africa and in the UK. We never looked at stories about Africa, whether in history or current affairs, that were positive. So it was, how do we look at Africa through our own lens, and how do we rewrite the stories of the continent? And for me, my passions are, I love to travel and I love luxury. I love really nice things, and pairing those things together, the two things that I'm passionate about, and what I now believe is truly my life's mission, which is to bring what we currently define as African luxury to the stage of global luxury. Like, how do we do that in the process of creating local, sustainable economic growth and creating dignity for our people? So I felt like creating a luxury safari lodge business really brought all of those elements of what I wanted to do and who I am together. So over time, the vision has evolved into something bigger. Batoka, I see it now as more than a hospitality business. We're really growing to be a lifestyle and well-being brand. We operate our flagship property, which is called Zambezi Sands. It's a luxury tented lodge on the Zambezi River in the national park, and are currently developing a few more properties in Zimbabwe, which is my family's heritage. But the heart of all of it is the mission to create experiences that restore people emotionally, physically, and spiritually, while uplifting communities around us. And I think ultimately Batoka Africa is trying to expand the definition of African luxury. It's not just about the aesthetics. It's about how we connect. It's about wellness. It's about nature. It's about community. And it's about deep respect for a place and for people.
It's almost very kind of understated in everything that you're doing and everything that you're bringing about, because this show is really focused on systems catalysts and systems entrepreneurs, and you speak about just sort of, okay, this is a hospitality brand, but it really is so much more than that. And I've been able to sort of witness in the way that you have the arc of what you're bringing about is that, hospitality in the way in which, you have kind of designed this is that it really does elevate an entire system. It elevates an entire system of what it means to provide a sustainable ecosystem on the continent, right? And I think that there's some really interesting just components to what you're doing that are really worth expanding on more as it highlights sort of the system that you are impacting. So one of the things that comes to mind is the Tessie Fund. Am I saying that right? The Tessie Fund?
Yes. Yeah.
And how that, where that sits through Batoka. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in actual fact, the word Tesse is a Shona word that means all of us and together. And what that is we take 10% of all bed night revenues and we set those aside. And the idea behind that when we first started was we use that 10% to reinvest in the community and reinvest in our people. For me, I grew up in a Christian household, and we grew up with the idea of 10% tithing 10% of your income. And for me, that means giving 10% back. So what we've done with the Tese Fund is we now look at projects and initiatives that our current staff come up with that impact their community. So over 80% of our staff are employed from the local community, in which one of our properties, our currently under development property, is Gorgeous Lodge sits, and that's communities called Chisuma. And the idea is that a staff member comes to us and says, this is an issue I've identified in the community. This is how I think we can solve it. And this is how I think access to the fund can help us do that. And to be honest with you, the concept, sounds great, I think. But in terms of implementing, it's been extremely challenging for us, just because we need initiatives that are sustainable, right? That teach people how to fish and are not just handing out fish. Mm-hmm. But one of the projects that has really worked well this past year in particular was a sewing initiative that was started by our property manager at the Gorgeous Lodge, which is under development. And she started a sewing group with women who were the heads of their household in the community. So single mothers or women who'd been widowed, women who were, teenage mothers and were looking for an opportunity to provide for their children. And she created a sewing initiative. And one of our guests actually donated the first sewing machine. And she, they taught them, they're self-taught. They taught themselves in embroidery and different stitch work. And then she came to us and said, well, I think there's a lot more opportunity than what we're doing. And what we were able to fund through the Tese Fund was to actually expand their skill set. So we brought in a partner called Collaborative Craft Project, who specialize in training women further in sewing and embroidery, in basket weaving, and in other creative crafts. And they came in and they've spent the last, I'm going to say 6 months training the women, and they've now created a bigger business out of that. So they sell at the Vic Falls market. They're currently putting together what is going to be our Christmas gifting for our guests that will be in camp. We're looking at how do we enhance our guest experience in partnership with them. And they're at a point now where they're making enough money where they're able to sustain the business and reinvest in it to get their own raw materials, but we still do supplement a little bit. But that's what the Tese Fund was created for. It was to create small businesses within the community that allow people to feed and provide more than just the necessities for their family and for their community, but allow them to build and create some kind of legacy of their own.
See, and this is so cool, and this is such a prime example, because by, Batoka being able to sort of reinvest in the community, you've created a whole other business that can now participate in the hospitality and tourism economy and create jobs and be sustainable. And I think that's, that, cycle makes so much sense, right? From an entrepreneurship and even just business perspective, being able to create things that, rise the economy in such a positive way. So that's, I think that's really cool. And, Batoka is a social enterprise, meaning that it's profitable and it's a profitable business. But what I think is so clear is how deeply the community ties are and the community development initiatives. So how do you balance the financial and sort of the purpose-driven aspect of the business? And do you have any kind of examples of how that's been difficult?
Yeah, I think somebody put this perfectly at a conference I was at a couple of months ago, Profit with Purpose. And I don't see purpose and profit as being opposites. I see them as mutually reinforcing pillars. So a healthy financial business is what allows us to invest in community initiatives without being dependent on external funding. And the strength of our social footprint is what strengthens our brand. A lot of the times when we attend trade shows or we're meeting with B2B partners or even direct customers, one of the things that really attracts the traveler to our brand is being able to be immersed in Zimbabwean culture and being able to give back. I think we've reached a point where, because there is also so much wealth across the globe, when people travel, they're looking for more than just an experience that they can post online. They're also looking to fulfill some kind of, something within themselves where they're doing good. And I think we really attract that conscious traveler and build trust within our teams. So I find that this balance comes from discipline. We have to run the business well in order for this to work. We have to control our costs. We have to maintain our standards. We have to invest in our talent, and we have to innovate. And at the same time, we need to remain anchored in our purpose. And that needs to be understood from the people that sit in managerial positions in our business all the way to entry-level positions in our business. That in order for all of us to succeed beyond just us as individuals, we all have a part to play. So, that sustainability is prioritized, and because of that, dignity is never compromised. I think purpose guides the direction that we're going in, and profit is what fuels that journey. And people need to understand that. Everyone in your team needs to understand that. I'm trying to think of an example of how this has worked. I think it takes. I always say entrepreneurship is a bit of like a baptism by fire situation.
That's a great way to describe it.
And I was saying recently to someone how, gosh, if I knew everything I know now, I think I'd be so riddled with fear and I wouldn't start. But I think, when I look at it's in hospitality as well, it's such a capital intensive industry to be in. And when I've looked at, there are months where it's really hard to get the occupancy percentages that we're looking at. And our staff will get frustrated when there are no guests coming into the property. And I think it's not just frustration because they're not able to work to the level of busyness that they'd like to, but I think it's because there is a deep understanding that if our occupancies are low and not where we expect them to be, not what we've budgeted for, it means that the impact and what we're able to do for their community or for their families is also limited. So I think it's just, let's say repetition is the law of lasting impression, repeating our purpose. And it brings me back to, a little bit, I think we touched on in a little bit earlier in the conversation, which was like values. And a value alignment. We're aligned in our values as a team. And I think that's what allows us to continue to run the business.
I think that's, you really hit the nail on the head around sort of the what it means to be operating as a team, what it means to be operating as a unit. Because what I've seen also just in my entrepreneurship journey is that the rubber meets the road in the daily decisions, right? And you even said it at the beginning in sort of how your journey was shaped around sort of this consistency, around sort of making the longer term decisions, even if those are the harder ones to make. And it's really, really difficult to do that as almost like a solo CEO or solo entrepreneur if you don't have a team around you that isn't completely aligned in those values and in that mission. And I want to talk a little bit about your focus on women in this as well, because I think that one thing I've witnessed is you're obviously a female entrepreneur and you have a unique focus on wanting to also, emphasize women in your entrepreneurial journey and in Batoka Africa. So how has that mission come to light, and what does that look like with respect to your team and the decisions that you all make?
Yeah, I think it was pretty natural to focus on women. as I said, I'm co-founder of Batoka Africa, which means I have another founder. And that happens to be my mom. And she was the first person who really believed in what I was building. And I say this all the time. It's one thing to believe in someone and tell them that you believe in them. It's another thing to put money behind that and show them how much you believe in them. So she was the first person to really back my dream for Batoka Africa financially. And she continues to do so, and also just, give me so much advice on leadership in general. And I think when I look at our household, I come from a family where there are 5 girls. We were a majority female household. And I do have a brother, and a lot of love to him, but we'll focus on the girls for now. But, 5 really strong women, and then my mom. And what I've seen growing up is just how much she has championed us as individuals. And there's never been that barrier that as women, we can't achieve anything. And she really, kind of drilled that into us. And when I became a founder, it never really crossed my mind that I'm a woman and things might be different entering the safari industry. There were a lot of things about me that were different. I was a woman, I was Black, I was a Pan-African, global, I'm Zimbabwean, love Zimbabwe, but I was not living in Zimbabwe. So there were a lot of things about me that were not the norm, that posed as barriers. But ignorance is bliss. I didn't realize there were barriers. And I think I recognize just how important it is to put a seed in a woman. When we look at households in the community of Chisuma, for example, if you give a woman something, a woman is thinking about how she is going to feed her family. She's investing in the education of her family. They're households that are run by grandmothers. They're households that are run by teenagers who are the oldest sister in the family. She's thinking about how far that dollar can go. And this is what I've experienced personally. When, sometimes when men get their paychecks, and I do understand there are men that are different, but it's very rare that their first thought is, how far is this dollar going to take my family? Sometimes, we've had staff say, oh, pay came late, I couldn't go to the pub, and that's not the woman's first priority. Her first priority is not herself. It's growth for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it's so important to invest in women. I think, call it gender roles or whatever has been imposed of us through generations and generations. But instinctively, for a lot of women in our community, the first thought is, how do I further this dollar for everyone else? And I think for so long, women have been left behind in a lot of key conversations. And in the West and in, corporate conversations, we are talking a lot about, equality for men and women in the workplace. But in some of these places, we're not. And it's just as important that we not only talk about it, but we act where our money is and put our money where our words are. Sorry.
No, absolutely. And how, from what you've experienced, how does the hospitality industry and luxury tourism industry throughout the continent of Africa, how does that uniquely impact women?
I won't speak for the whole continent. Very much focused on Zimbabwe at the moment. Yeah. But I think, one of the things that was a driving force for me behind Batoka is that I felt as an industry we needed to do more than say we employ from the community. That employment needs to mean something. And, one of the things that we look at it as is training and upskilling staff, both male and female. But I think, for our female staff, we slowly seeing, and I always say, I am upset when people leave our team to go somewhere else, but I'm also really excited that they have been trained to the point where they can go to a property somewhere else and their skill is valued. And we're seeing a lot more women coming up, a lot of women, exiting to go to a lodge that's maybe closer to home, because they now have the skill set to do that. And then a lot of young women choosing to come into the safari lodge industry because they now see opportunity beyond, working in one department for the rest of their lives. And I think, that's one way in which the safari industry, in particular, can work with women. It's through training. And then the second is through providing opportunity and access. I think we all work together. And, when I think about my career, a lot of it has been, the networks that I've been able to plug myself into and how those networks have connected me to bigger networks and more people. You and I are connected through a network, and creating those network opportunities for women to be able to thrive and succeed. We have incredible guests, influential guests, creative guests that visit our properties, and allowing for our staff to be able to interact with our guests and see a larger world than they're in is one of the key things.
I was having a conversation with Shamina Singh just earlier this week for this podcast as well, and the way that she communicated about sort of access to networks and almost democratizing access to networks being really just one of the key drivers of systems change in general. And I think it's not as talked about as it should be around sort of what it means to be disconnected from those networks and how difficult that can be to really get access to most other things, finances, people, care, all of those just really important things that are imperative to the human experience and to surviving and thriving.
Yeah, I think, to comment on your first comment about networks, one of the reasons why I love podcasts as a medium is it's, in some ways, I think, in a way for people to get access to networks and to get access to people. I was sitting at a dinner table yesterday with an incredible group of Black businesswomen in the UK, and just listening to their stories of what they've created and how they created it. And at the end of the dinner, I made a comment that this is so important, the storytelling, hearing other people's stories and how they came up, hearing, the grit, the consistency that is required for us to not only build systems, but, more importantly, as you speak, to transform systems. And I think podcasting is a way in which we can do that, is these conversations that you and I are having. Not only are you and I learning from each other in this conversation, but it also we've created a network between the two of us and the listeners to also learn from us. So I think, there is a way in which networking is opening up, and I really love to see that shift. Now, you're going to have to remind me what your actual question was.
No, it was a multi-layer, and I had a lot folded in there. So, first of all, I just want to echo, I appreciate that. And I completely agree. And that really is one of the reasons that we started this podcast in the first place, was to sort of create access to people's stories and how those stories really become the DNA of the systems that they're aiming to change. The kind of the follow-on question to that was thinking about Batoka Africa. And you had mentioned before that, you're kind of, it's moving from even just kind of in this realm of hospitality to more of a lifestyle and wellness kind of initiative. And I wonder how you think about that elevation or sort of that growth in the transformation of the system that you're working towards changing.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've learned is that real sustainable change is slow, but it has to be deeply intentional. I think, systems don't transform overnight, and that requires us to be patient. It requires us to have strong partnerships, because as single entities, we can't create wide-scale impact. As single entities, we can't transform a whole system. We can transform a part of it. But if a system is 100 parts and you transform one and the other 99 don't change, it's going to take you 10 times the time to change anything. So I think, we need to remain close to each other, going back to that networking, but, conversation, but close to people that are like us and people that are not like us. Because the moment we disconnect from people's lived realities, our intentions lose relevance, and that idea of transforming a system loses its essence completely. So I think we need to have strong operational systems, financial discipline, humility to learn from failure, humility to learn from everyone, those that we respect or we think are, deserve our respect and are above us, and those that we think lowly of. There really shouldn't be anyone that we think that, but I think there is learning from everyone. And then I think we also, scaling isn't just about size, it's about depth. And asking ourselves, are people's lives actually improving? Are structures shifting? Are opportunities being created? Are opportunities being expanded? And at the end of the day, that's what meaningful scale looks like. And at every step of consistency, continuing to ask ourselves those questions.
I think I just want to capture that right there, because that's so critical. Scaling isn't just about size, it's about depth. And that takes time and it takes patience. And do you have, I know for me, there's like part of this and in this work and in both the work of entrepreneurship, systems change, systems impact, it can sometimes be frustrating how long it takes, and I wonder, how do you deal with that? Do you ever get impatient? Do you ever get frustrated in this work at all? And if so, how do you manage that?
Most definitely. These last couple of months, it's, such a timely conversation to be having. Because, and I've been saying this to everyone I have an opportunity to say it to, but, I'm sad that I've only realized this now, but also really happy that I have. But I found myself experiencing burnout pretty much every year. I would need to take like a month to 6 weeks off because I was physically and mentally exhausted from running my own business. And then I'd find I lose passion, and then I have to like learn to re-love it and want to come back, etc. And I got to the end of last year and thought to myself, this is completely unsustainable. I don't think it's good for my physical health, and I don't think it's good for my mental health. And how do I, get to a place where I consistently have love for what I do and what I've set out to do, what I believe my purpose is? And it clicked to me a couple of weeks ago even. I was at a talk and someone is being introduced on stage, an entrepreneur who I have a lot of respect for. And the presenter said, this person has been a giant in this industry for 4 decades. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's taken this human being more than 4 decades to build what they have built, to create the impact they have created. And I think, we have been born in this time and we live in this time where everything is so easy to access, and we're so used to like instant gratification that I had to remind myself, like, yeah, I've set out to, have impact and create opportunities, but that doesn't happen overnight. It is small, consistent steps. And always reminding myself the reason why I'm doing something and the reason why I've started. And I really think it's brought over this calm and peace to me that it's not even the marathon. It's like, what is that long? It's the ultra marathon, that like 96 kilometer one that you'll be running for like the next 30, 40 years, but there's no rush right now. The urgency should be to maintain the purpose and have that North Star. But what should keep me fueled is like small, consistent steps. And I suddenly just let go of this expectation to have, certain achievements by 2026, by 2027, and just be like, at every point, every month, every week, can I ask myself the question of what is it that you've set out to do? And can you write down one or two things that have taken you a small step closer to what you've set out to do? So I think, taking a step back and realizing, none of this is a sprint. It's a journey that we're on, and keeping my focus on that North Star.
So Vimbai, as we close, one thing that I've been doing kind of this season is asking our guests to kind of leave us with a thought or a question to pose to our listeners as they're, talking to their friends about this podcast, hopefully after work, maybe, or on the commute home. So do you have a question that you want to leave our listeners with today to ponder later on?
Yeah. By the way, this was a very hard one for me to think about.
It is. It is hard. But you know what? People have been taking it in so many different directions that I keep asking it. So
yeah. So I think I would say, what would, your business or your project or what you're doing look like if it was designed not to extract from people and from places, but to give and to build and to create ecosystems? How different would that look from what you currently have to what you really should be having? Because I think our shift needs to change from taking and more to giving, and not, necessarily giving financially, but, giving in any way we can. So how would your business or your work or your life look? How different would it look if it were designed not to extract from people and places, but to give?
That's phenomenal. That's a really good question. I'm glad that I asked you that. So thank you. Vimbai, thank you so much for coming on. I feel like I learned so much, and it's just been such a privilege and a joy to follow your work and I encourage everybody to follow Vimbai on social media, because she always has just wonderful podcast recommendations. She has wonderful book recommendations. Just thank you so much for coming on. And I hope that we get to continue the conversation at some point.
English, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully we'll do it in person next time.
Yes, that would be great.